I have long avoided talking about Half-Life 3 here on the channel, but now there's a direct connection between the Steam machine and this game, so it's finally time. After that, let's talk about how even though Valve is working hard to bring Android games to Steam and Steam to Android phones, it doesn't look like SteamOS is coming to mobile phones anytime soon. And finally, people are a little bummed that the Steam frame is going to be missing 2 features at launch, but Valve has confirmed that they are working on them for after launch. How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is Deck Ready, my channel all about Steam hardware. I hope you're having a great week playing a ton of video games. By the time this video launches, I'm pretty confident we'll be at 92,000 subs, which means 8,000 subs to go until I can stop doing these sub shoutouts. I noticed people mentioned I haven't brought up my promise in a while, and there are so many new people here, so if you missed it, when I hit 100,000 subscribers, if it happens by the end of the year, I will do an entire video in my 94 Dodge Viper. It's something that people on the channel asked for, so I will deliver. The one caveat is now that it's winter, I have to wait for spring. The car is in storage, but it will happen. I promise. If I hit 100K by the end of the year, I promise it will happen. But with the intro out of the way, let's get into the first news story here, which is of course about Half-Life 3. So if you follow my Twitter, deck_ready, I have been talking about this a lot on there, but I haven't really talked about it here on the channel because I don't like getting into super deep rumor/speculation territory. I like there being a concrete source, and as concrete as I consider Tyler McVicker, I just wanted to wait until, there was more stuff to talk about out there. And thankfully today there is. So if you haven't kept up with this, basically ever since the ending of Half-Life Alyx, people have been waiting for Half-Life 3. Well, they've been waiting longer than that, but if you've played Half-Life Alyx till the end, they do some retconning, they mess around with the timeline. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's very clear that they were setting up a next game in the series. And I've been keeping up with Tyler McVicker's channel since it was called Valve News Network. I've been watching the HLX files. I fully believe this game is in development because, he's data mined it. And it's obvious that they're in the back end constantly updating this game. And most recently, he reported that they're at the point where they're polishing it. They're going to announce it like it's actually done. They're working on trailers and it is a very real game. And all of this really came to a head when we were talking about the Steam machine, the Steam frame, the Steam controller, because there were patents being filed. There were leaks about Fremont, X, Y, and Z. Like the SVG files for the Steam controller leak. So it was clear Valve was building to something. And I suggested that they announce it all at the same time and don't break it up so you can maximize the amount of mind share that you get from an announcement like that, And all of that came to pass, but one thing was curiously missing, which was Half-Life 3. And in hindsight, I don't think you could announce something like Half-Life 3 alongside this hardware because as hyped as people are for the Steam machine and everything like that, I'm super hyped for the Steam machine. If you announce Half-Life 3, that transcends all of it. That transcends all gaming news in history. Like even GTA 6, I don't think is as big as the announcement of Half-Life 3. So you would kill the hype for your Steam hardware in favor of a game. So it was smart to split them up. And then things got even more interesting when a bunch of the famous leakers started talking about hearing actual dates for Half-Life 3 being announced and released within 2025, if not maybe early 2026. And then they all started talking to each other and realized Valve did the same thing with this game that they did with Half-Life Alyx, where internally they told Valve employees a bunch of different dates to catch leakers because, if you tell everyone different dates and then they talk to people in the press, like, I don't know, Mike Straw from Insider Gaming, or I think Jez Corden, there's a few other people who come up all the time, then you can catch the people leaking because you know who you told what date. And then if you see that date appear, you're like, oh, that person ratted us out. But speaking of Mike Straw, this is the guy I trust because he's been the most careful. He hasn't revealed what date he heard. He's been cross-referencing in the background, and he hasn't made any commitments about it coming out this year or even being announced this year. I don't have any sources. No one talks to me, but just like my intuition is telling me that Jeff Keighley will be involved somehow, just because if you look back at a lot of Valve releases, he's always there. He does documentaries about them. He's always had a strong relationship with Valve. The Game Awards are this week on December 11th. So it could show up there, but again, it's the same situation as the hardware, where if you announce Half-Life 3 at a show with a bunch of games, none of those games are going to get any press because Half-Life 3 is the biggest game announcement you could ever possibly make at this point in time. But with all that being said, there is now strong evidence connecting the Steam machine to Half-Life 3 to the point where I kind of believe that it will be a launch title for this console or hardware or whatever you want to call it. It'll be on Steam. You can play it on any PC, but it's going to be tied to the Steam machine's launch. So going back to Half-Life Half-Life 2 Episode 3, we all know it never came out, but they were working on it for a while. They restarted development on it a few times and ended up canceling it, and it got to the point where the writer, Mark Laidlaw, ended up releasing a short story called Epistle 3. And it's really good because if you read it, it's very clear that the short story is what he was working up to with Half-Life 2 Episode 3, and in that story, the stand-in character for Gordon Freeman is named Gertrude Fremont. The code name for the Steam machine is the Fremont, so like you can connect the dots there. It seems like everything really is coalescing so that we will get Half-Life 3 probably at the launch of the Steam machine. And like, you know, I don't like believing in stuff like this just because I don't like getting people excited and then having things not happen. I'm also that kind of person who really hates being wrong, so that's why I haven't talked about it here on the channel. It just seems like there's way too much smoke for there not to be at least a little fire. Like, they're aware they have to finish this out. And we all know that, like, as much as Half-Life is a great first-person shooter series with an awesome story and a really original, unique world, it really only shows up when Valve has a big technological leap in game development to show off. So like most recently, Half-Life Alyx was a VR only game because Valve wanted to make a VR killer app. And that's a huge reason why Half-Life 2 Episode 3 never happened. They just kept stagnating on adding a new feature that would really push gaming forward. And right now, simultaneously, it feels like we're on the precipice of something big happening, but also like everything stagnating. But one game kind of convinced me that we are going to see a leap forward, and that is Arc Raiders. If you've never looked into the development of the AI for the robots, it's actually really interesting. And it's one of the only interesting and cool uses of AI that I've seen so far. I don't want to like say it wrong and have people get up in arms about AI, because if you say AI in game development, people freak out. Go watch it and you'll probably be convinced. But yeah, like I said earlier, when there's this much smoke, there's probably fire. So something is happening with Half-Life 3. And I feel like this is important for Valve, obviously, because people really want it. But also, it's just something that they've had sitting on their plate for far too long. And it's kind of like a ball and chain dragging them back a little bit or holding them still. So once they release Half-Life 3, it'll probably end the series, which is fine because we've had some good Half-Life games. And I want to see new stuff from Valve internally, not stuff that they buy from modders or something like that. A brand new tried and true real game like Deadlock, for example, but more single player oriented, or maybe even Left 4 Dead 3. And they can't do that stuff until they get past Half-Life 3. It's holding them back. They just got to do it. So yeah, all we can really do is just sit back and wait, but this has been a lot of fun. So I'm glad I finally got to talk about it here on the channel. Let's move on to the second news story and talk about Android on Steam. So we kind of covered this a little bit last week when it was revealed that Valve has been funding Fex for like 10 years. They also made Lepton, and those are basically the reverse of each other. So Fex is a way to emulate x86 games on ARM, and Lepton is a translation layer for Android games up to Steam. And the reason that's important is for the Steam frame. A lot of people are assuming Android games would come to Steam, and that might happen, but the real focus is to make sure that developers who made games for the Oculus platform have an off-ramp, right? Because Meta is not really helping them out. New games are coming out all the time, and people aren't even going through the effort to pirate them. So that shows a bad sign for the game platform on Meta. And instead of asking the developers to port the games themselves, they invented a translation layer that'll make it basically drag and drop, which is good because porting the game would cost money they probably don't have, and it's more work that they probably don't want to do. But in the reverse, it's also very cool because it would be sweet to have the Steam store on phones, right? Like I have an iPad Pro with an M5 in it. It could run a lot of the games that I own on Steam, and the only thing holding it back is the fact that if I want to play any of those games that have ended up on iOS, I have to rebuy them on the App Store, and that sucks. So if Valve could kind of leverage these new EU laws where like you have to have other storefronts like the Epic Game Store or Xbox's store on iOS and Android and get that working in the United States, that would be a net win for everyone. I know there'd be a huge fight about that, but that's obviously what they're working towards. And if you want to hear how awesome this would be for keeping things open and free and like letting your PC be your PC or letting your phone be your phone, go check out my buddy Gardner Bryan's video all about it because he absolutely nailed this topic. But you know, if you follow the stepping stones, you could kind of see an eventual future where maybe Valve makes an open operating system like Android initially was intended to be, called SteamOS for phones. And as of right now, Pierre-Luc Griffay was asked about this in an interview, and he said, nah, that's not something they're really working on right now, but the possibility is there in the future. I'm really open to something like this. Obviously, I love SteamOS. I love Steam's platform. I'm a huge fanboy of it, but like there's always that future where, God forbid, Gabe disappears tomorrow and gets usurped, and the person who takes over does a lot of bad bad things, like taking the company public, which would be disastrous because then there will be shareholders who will just turn it into Microsoft or Sony or Nintendo, and all the problems we have with those platforms would then infect Valve and Steam, which would be bad. Or there's the future where it just doesn't catch on because you need like completely unlocked phones. And I know Valve always says they're open to work with other hardware manufacturers, but up until now, the only manufacturer who's really shown any interest is Lenovo. And I don't think the Legion Go S with SteamOS sold all that well. You could chalk that up to, the fact that it's way too expensive and the fact that it used the Z1 Extreme right when the Z2 Extreme was coming out. There's a lot of external factors, but there's always the possibility that SteamOS just isn't widely known enough to really break out to the point where it would be worth investing all that time, energy, and money into getting SteamOS on phones. So while I could definitely see a future where it is possible, I think anything's possible, I think focusing on what they're working on right now is the smart move, and I'm glad they kind of put this to rest because getting Steam on phones, really noble goal. I think that should be something they pursue. Getting Android games on Steam, also something they should pursue as long as they can figure out how to moderate it pretty well, because mobile phone stores are an absolute mess. And if you introduce a bunch of these free-to-play games that are driven heavily by microtransactions, like I know those exist on PC, but there is a little bit of a wall in terms of what practices actually make their way to PC, and developers kind of keep their games off Steam at least for a little while so that they don't get review bombed. There's a lot of stuff that would have to be figured out. So like, I'm glad that they're taking a slow, measured approach to this, but I'm also glad that they're funding this stuff kind of out of the goodness of their hearts, just to keep things as open as possible when you've got Microsoft turning Windows into like a surveillance operating system and it just sucks butt now. But that brings us to the third news story here, which is some features that'll be missing from the Steam frame at launch, which are admittedly disappointing. But one thing that's really cool about the MetaQuest 3 is that you can play 2D games in stereoscopic 3D. Like they have some sort of translation layer there that can look at the image being output from the game and kind of like translate it to 3D, sort of like the 3DS, because they use similar technologies. And it's a cool feature because VR is kind of transitioned into XR or AR, where you see the world around you through the headset, and then the windows kind of place themselves in the world. So you want that 3D effect, and people just assumed it would be there at launch for the Steam frame, but unfortunately that is not the case. Thankfully, Upload VR got to talk to some Valve engineers, and they asked and they said, yep, we want to get to that point. We're not going to hit it at launch, but it is something we're heavily investigating. So that's good. But the other thing people really are kind of miffed about is that the pass-through video from the Steam frame is going to be black and white. Now, as someone who's not super heavily invested in VR, like I really enjoy it. I play games on it. I use the spatial stuff from time to time on my MetaQuest 3. I understand why black and white pass-through isn't necessarily the most ideal thing, but obviously Valve is entering a pretty hotly contested market. It's kind of volatile right now because of the stuff Meta's done, but in favor of getting people off of Meta's platform and into the open sort of SteamOS platform or Steam VR platform, you'd kind of want them to tick off that box because it's just another thing that people are going to complain about. And while Valve hasn't confirmed that they are specifically working on it, there is one feature of the Steam frame that's kind of going underreported, and that's that it's completely modular. There are extra ports that aren't being used on the headset that will be usable by third-party devices. So whether JSO wants to like invest in pass-through cameras that work in color, or if Valve is going to do it themselves, I think there is a future where we do get color pass-through. It's just going to be an extra add-on, which is kind of disappointing because if you look at stuff like the Steam Dock, they kind of screwed up, I think, by including the charger in the box. I understand why they did it. Of course, you need a charger to make sure the Steam Deck gets power while it's in the dock, but like, I wish they just ate the cost to get it down to the level that everyone else is at, like JSOX and iVolar and all the other third-party manufacturers of docks. I understand that they don't include the charger in the box, but they've kind of determined the price point of these docks. So Valve coming out late, A, and B, at double the price was kind of a bummer. And going by that logic, I think that camera add-on would be pretty expensive. So hopefully it's something they can get into a relatively cheap price range, or the fact that it's missing causes the Steam frame itself to be cheaper, but that's just something we'll have to wait and see on. I'm glad they are making sure though that we're going to get the stereoscopic 3D for 2D games implemented after launch. I saw some people saying that it's a feature they'll kick to the side and let never really materialize and just move on from. But if you look at how they develop the Steam Deck, they are rapid fire with new features that people ask for. So I think they've proven, naysayers otherwise there. But yeah, I am excited for the Steam Frame. If you want to see more coverage about it, please let me know down in the comments. But yeah, guys, that's all I've got for you in today's video. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching and shape on.